Okay, welcome to this deep dive. Today we're trying to navigate the, well, sometimes pretty tricky currents of information in the Pi Network community.
That sounds about right. It can get confusing.
Yeah, and we're zeroing in on one particular viewpoint. It comes from our source material, focusing on someone named Dimas Nui.
Mm.
And he has some very, very specific ideas about where you find the real story on Pi Network and who he thinks is kind of getting it wrong.
Right. The source we've got is basically a YouTube video looking at an article or maybe a post by this Dimas Nui person.
Okay.
And it uses some pictures, some visuals to, make its points. It really highlights this tension he sees between official info and what certain community folks are saying.
Gotcha. So our goal here, our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the main message from this source. According to Dimas Nui, as he's presented here, where does the actual verifiable truth about Pi Network live?
Yeah.
And what's his beef, specifically with other voices, particularly people the source identifies as GZFI global leaders? Let's get into it. Okay, so the absolute core of Dimas Nui's argument, at least as it's laid out in this material we have, is this claim. There are only three places, three reliable official sources for understanding what's really going on with Pi Network, period.
Just three. Wow. Okay.
That's just three.
And the video, the source material, it makes a point of showing this visually. There's an image, right?
Blah.
And it puts these three things, the blockchain explorer, the source code, and the white papers side by side, or rather against.
Against who?
Against figures who are named as GZFI leaders. Derision and Lomari are the names mentioned. So it immediately sets up this contrast. Technical stuff versus, well, community personalities.
Okay, that's pretty clear. So let's break down these three pillars of truth then, as this source presents them. First one, the Pi Network white paper.
Right. This is positioned as like the foundational document. The source material specifically mentions both the 2019 version and the 2021 version.
And what's its job, according to this perspective from Dimas Nui, I mean?
It's described as the main framework. The plan, basically, for the whole project, from phase one right through to the end stage.
Okay, the big plan.
Yeah, but what's kind of interesting, and the source says this comes directly from the white paper itself,
What's that?
is that both versions, the 2019 and the 2021, are apparently designed to be editable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, based on data they collect during the closed mainnet phase. So it suggests even the main plan isn't totally rigid. It's meant to adapt, based on what they learn.
Okay, adaptable. That's source number one. What's the second one he says is exclusively reliable?
That would be the GitHub code. The source sometimes calls it Git code or just GitHub.
Right, the actual code repository.
Exactly. And this is presented as like the engine room, where the technical work happens. Its purpose, in this view, is to develop, improve, and refine the framework that the white paper talks about.
So where the ideas become actual software.
Pretty much. This is where the building, the real nuts and bolts work goes on.
And the source material emphasizes something specific about GitHub, right?
Yeah, it stresses that everything technical, everything sort of behind the scenes that needs to be ready before launch must be on GitHub.
Okay, so that's the proof in his view.
Seems like it. And it even mentions specific components that are supposedly still being worked on or need to be ready on GitHub.
Like what?
Things like the node and the supernode.
Which are?
Basically the core systems that run the network, process transactions, keep everything secure. Also, smart contracts, those automated agreements on the blockchain.
Right.
The underlying protocol, and also the decentralized apps, the dApps, that are supposed to run on Pi. His point seems to be their status on GitHub is the key measure of how ready the project actually is.
Makes sense from a technical perspective. Okay, white paper GitHub. What's the third and final official source according to this view?
The Pi browser.
The Pi browser. Okay, and its function.
So in this framework, the Pi browser is where the stuff that's been built on GitHub, following the white paper plan, where it actually gets executed,
Right.
where users interact with it.
So it's the user-facing part where the tech becomes functional.
Exactly. It's kind of the bridge between the back-end development and the user experience.
Okay, so white paper, GitHub code, Pi browser. Those are the only three reliable sources according to Dimas Nui in this material. So what about everything else? Information from other places.
Well, he's pretty dismissive. According to this viewpoint presented in the source, any information coming from outside those three channels is just not reliable.
Not reliable at all.
Seems like it. He specifically calls out external info, analysis, personal opinions, even criticism. Basically saying you can't trust those for the real picture of the project.
Wow. And what about his own stuff? Does he address that?
He does. The source reports him saying that his own articles are based only on those 3 official sources.
Okay.
And he explicitly says he avoids personal analysis or opinions because, in his view, they just lead to arguments.
Huh. So just the facts, ma'am, but only these facts.
Kind of, yeah. It points to a very specific philosophy about how information should be shared in the community.
Mm.
His recommendation, and the source puts it quite strongly, is speak with data.
Mm.
Speak with the official sources. Don't guess. Don't interpret.
That's a hard line. And it sounds like this strict view leads directly into the criticisms he levels, or that the source says he levels, against those GZFE leaders.
Absolutely. It flows right into that. The source names Derision, described as head of GZFE Global and a tax accountant.
Okay.
And Lomari, identified as deputy head of GZFE Global Asia, working in marketing. The source even shows their social media profile info in a visual.
Right. And his message to them, as Dimas Nui is presented here, is what exactly?
It's very direct, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You must study these 3 official sources, Whitepaper, GitHub, PiBrowser, before you publish anything about Pi.
Study up before you speak up.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And there's another interesting bit in this source. It reports that Derision apparently told a bunch of GZFE global ambassadors to block Dimas Nui.
Block him on social media, presumably.
Presumably.
Yeah.
And Dimas Nui's reported response was pretty sharp. He basically said, according to the source, that blocking people just proves you're incompetent. You can't handle debate or the truth.
Okay, so there's definitely some friction there. Does he criticize more than just their information sources? What about their actions, like community movements?
Yes, the source says he does. He apparently takes aim at community movements reportedly led by GZFE.
And what's the issue there, according to him?
His main point seems to tie back to the tech again. He questions how they can set goals for movements. The source mentions one targeting June 28, 2025.
Okay.
When, from his perspective, looking at GitHub, the core technical pieces just aren't ready yet. They're still being developed.
And he lists those pieces again?
Yeah, the source says he brings up the node, supernode, smart contracts, protocol, dApps.
Mm-hmm.
All the stuff he says needs to be fully baked on GitHub first.
So he's saying their goals are out of sync with the technical reality.
That's the strong implication. He stresses setting goals based on, and this is a phrase the source uses, current reality, suggesting their movement goals aren't grounded.
Right.
The material even quotes him saying something like, effort and enthusiasm are useless if you don't understand the actual Chi network technology.
Ouch. Does he give examples of movements he thinks failed because of this?
He does, according to the source. It mentions him pointing to OM 2024, PiDay, and PiDay 2025 as past failed movements they should learn from. The idea being they weren't aligned with a tech readiness.
Okay, so a pattern in his view.
And just to underline his point about tech knowledge, the source includes this claim he makes that really understanding the tech is limited to specialists like him and someone else named Kosasi.
Right, so only a select few really get it, according to this perspective.
That seems to be the assertion presented.
Okay, so criticism of information sources, criticism of movement goals. Does the source say he criticizes their views on the market too? Like Pi on exchanges?
Oh, yes. Very strongly, according to the material.
What's the issue there?
Well, the source reports that Derision urges people to, buy Pi coins, store it in wallets, accumulate it.
Okay, a hodl strategy, maybe?
Maybe. But Dimas Nui's counterpoint, based on how markets work in general, is that an exchange is an open market. It's supply, demand, liquidity. And his big point is nobody controls the stock market or any open exchange market, really.
So the idea of controlling the price by just holding is flawed, in his view.
Deeply flawed, it seems. This leads to probably the strongest quote attributed to him in the source material.
What does he say?
He apparently calls the idea that pioneers could somehow band together and empty an exchange before June 28. The stupidest thing he's heard in crypto.
Wow, that's blunt.
Yeah. He reportedly says it's worse than a rug pull token scam.
Goodness. And his reasoning for why it's impossible?
It's pretty straightforward, as presented. He mentions exchanges like OKX. They'll just add more liquidity if buying pressure increases significantly. The idea that a community group could just buy it all up and empty it, he sees that as a fundamental misunderstanding of market mechanics. Impossible.
Okay. So a very critical take on that whole market strategy aspect. How does the source wrap up his perspective? Any final thoughts on leadership or his stance?
It does touch on that. It includes his definition or description of what a true leader should be.
Which is?
Someone chosen Big-hearted, wise,
Yep.
someone who embraces all sides, and importantly is open to criticism and suggestions.
Tying back to the blocking thing again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The source mentions, he states again, that blocking people just proves incompetence in a leader.
And his final message.
It's presented as quite defiant, something like, hate me if you will, but never hate the truth. The strong implication being his perspective, derived from those three sources, is the truth.
Right.
And the source finishes with him encouraging the true pioneers, suggesting they're the ones who get it, who know the best steps,
Right.
which presumably means following his approach of sticking to only those three official sources.
Okay, so that's a deep dive into the specific viewpoint presented in our source material about Daimos Nui. Let's step back now. What does all this mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of Pi Network, or really any project like this?
Well, it definitely highlights a major challenge, doesn't it? How do you verify information in these, very active, decentralized online spaces?
Yeah.
This source gives us one very clear, very rigid answer. Stick only to the core technical outputs. The white paper, the code on GitHub, the official browser, everything else, noise, or worse.
It positions community analysis, opinions, even leadership figures as potentially unreliable or at least separate from the project's truth.
Right, and this specific conflict we've discussed between Daimos Nui's view and the Gizafi figures mentioned, it really throws that tension into sharp relief, the
Right.
gap that can exist between the official technical status.
What the code actually says and does.
Exactly. Versus the stories, the goals, the market talk generated within the community by passionate members and leaders.
So it really forces you, as someone trying to understand a project, to think hard about your own process. How do you decide what's credible?
How do you separate the, let's say, technical reality from the community's hopes, dreams, or even marketing strategies? It's not always easy.
No, definitely not. So this exploration of Daimos Nui's perspective, based purely on the source material we had, it gives a very distinct picture of one way to approach Pi Network information.
Yeah, it's a view absolutely anchored in the technical fundamentals, in the documentation. That's where the truth lies, according to this source's portrayal of his stance.
A perspective that really demands sticking to those official channels and viewing pretty much everything else, even from big names in the community, with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Or maybe unhealthy, depending on your view, but definitely skepticism.
Right. So as you continue your journey, engaging with these kinds of developing projects and their often very loud online communities, here's maybe a final thought to chew on.
Okay.
In this world flooded with information, with so many voices claiming authority, how do you build your own personal toolkit for verifying information? How do you decide who or what constitutes a truly reliable source on a project's actual status and its likely future? And how do you navigate that gap between the code and the conversation?